Hi viewers, in this class we are going to discuss the different kinds of behavior, the instinctive and motivated behavior among animals. An organism, in order to live successfully in its environment, either it should born with appropriate responses or it has to change its behavior based on its experiences. Then only it lives in its own environment as a successful one. Born with appropriate responses means there should be a mechanism in nervous system and inheritance that exhibit intrinsic response patterns. The inborn behavioral patterns of the organism are called as the instinctive behavior. In this, a complex mechanism is internalized. It is a characteristic of a species, genetically specific. It may be expressed with minute variations in the organisms of the same species. Instinctive behavior provides adaptive responses that are needed for an organism by birth itself. Instinctive behavior is really a gift for those organisms with less span of time and those which do not have protection for their progeny. Instinctive behavior is highly developed in arthropods, example, wasps. All the functions performed by the wasp in short span of time have come by birth. It is highly impossible to learn all of them through trial and error learning mode. And the wasp usually, whenever the male and female wasps, after the mating, male dies off and the female search a appropriate place for the nest and it lays the eggs in that nest and it kills the small insects and keep it within the nest as the food material for the developing organisms, and later on it also dies off. After the birth of the newborn, there were no parents to teach something how to live, but by birth it has certain features, then thereby it leads its life. Whereas in the case of a cub of a lion, it has many opportunities and long span of time, lifetime, and thereby it observes its parents and thereby it learns how to hunt and how to live in that particular environment. So such a kind of time is not at all there for the wasp to learn. Instinctive behavior is a combined effect of internal environment and as well as the external stimuli. Instinctive behaviors are released in mature form and organized form without any training and learning phenomena. Konrad Lorenz of Austria, Nicotin Bergen, Netherlands, they conducted experiments on animals except the mammals to study the behavioral patterns. Konrad Lorenz, Nicotin Bergen, and Karl von Frisch, they were awarded Nobel Prize in the year 1973 in the field of physiology or medicine. Then come to the salient features of the instinctive behavior. Instinctive behavior are always present in a particular genus and they show a particular response attitude. For example, courtship behavior of cocks, roosters, or nesting of honeybees before laying the eggs. And instinctive behavior, it shows the filtering of stimulus or filtering of stimuli. If you observe the behavior of the male stickleback fish, it responds against the ribbed abdomen of the another male. Usually, the male stickleback fishes they have a red colored abdomen, and thereby, when a male it sees the another male, it shows an aggressive behavior against the male. And if you observe the internal environment of the organisms, the best example is the courtship behavior of stickleback and role of hormones. The male usually during the breeding season it constructs a net, and with its courtship behavior it attracts the females and mates with it. After laying the eggs, it shows the defense against the enemies and also shows the parental care, and it is due to the different levels of hormones within the body of the organism. And IB, that is instinctive behavior, is also showing the vacuum responses. Conrad Lorenz wrote a book, The Story of Instinct, in 1951. In this, as example, the hunting behavior of the starling bird and nesting behavior of the Bengalis finches. What is the vacuum response is, naturally each and every organism has a natural behavior. If you restrict the organism, if you imprison them in the cages, then how they are acting naturally, the same behavior will be shown, and no work is done, but it shows the responses. The hunting behavior of the starling bird. How the starling bird that hunts the flies in the natural environment, if you bind over them in the cage, then they also shows the same responses as there is no flies, there is no work done. Such kind of reactions, such kind of responses are called as the vacuum responses. If you observe the Bengalis finches, they construct the nests, and if you cage them, if you keep them in a cage, also they act like the collection of the grass, collection of the twigs, and how they construct the nest, the same thing will be represented by the Bengalis finches. So as there is no real nest, but they show the same kind of responses as there is no work done, so that they are called as the vacuum responses. And there is a more significance of the stimuli in the instinctive behavior. Stimulus is required for the starting of instinctive behavior only, then they are not at all needed up to the end of the process. Instinctive behavior can be motivated by stimulus but not controlled by the stimulus at all. For the best example is, grey goose continues its behavior even after removing the egg. Usually, the birds during the hatching period, during the incubation period, they always keep and protect their eggs. If at all one egg, if it is rolled out from the nest, that will be taken back through its beak. If any egg rolled out, usually if you keep it back in the nest, although it shows the same behavior that it is taking back its egg into the nest, that kind of behavior will be seen in the grey goose. And courtship behavior is seen in the case of many birds and animals, and the specific behavior or series of behaviors that take place prior to the mating is the courtship behavior, and could involve sound, smell, visual display, and so on. Here we are observing the honeybees. Instinctive behavior in the stickleback, just now we discussed that. Van Irsel, Sevenster, and Bohl, they proved the instinctive behavior in the stickleback experimentally. Whenever there is a more daytime and more hormones, and that leads to the migration, reproductive migration of the fishes, and male attracts female by its red abdomen and constructs the nest, If at all it finds out a male and it shows the fighting behavior, whenever it come across the females, it exhibits the reproductive behavior and more hormones, more amount of hormones, external stimuli, and that leads to the excitation of the organism. Whereas less hormones, internal stimuli, that leads to the inhibition of that particular instinctive behavior. Here, the sunlight, warm water, thick plants in the water bodies, and the presence of female mate, all of them they act like the external stimuli for the instinctive behavior of the stickleback fish. And here, if you see, we can extract the same response with the models also. So here it is a male stickleback. If we show models like these with a red abdomen, that gives an aggressive behavior towards these models. As it is thinking, these models are the male stickleback fishes. And whenever you show a neutral model, the response is ignored. No response will be shown by the organism. And the next one is instinctive behavior and the strangeness of the stimuli. That is, models which are somewhat related, somewhat looking like the natural organisms, in the instinctive behavior, they elicit the same responses as to that of the natural organisms. So that the models of instinctive behavior also they are work like the natural releasing stimuli. That is, whenever you introduce a male model, that the real organism shows the fighting behavior, and if you introduce the female model, the organism shows the reproductive behavior. And there is a surprising response from the birdlings of the herring gull, a seagull, a seabird, based upon the mother beak shape and red spot upon the beak. These are the factors that acts like the stimuli for the opening mouth of the small birdling, developing birdling. We can get the same response with the appropriate model too. And in this case of ducklings, if you provide a model which looks like the ducks, that is the elongated neck and short tail, they do not show any kind of response. But if you inverse this model with the small neck and long tail, then they feel that it is a hunting bird, and thereby they give an response, they give a appropriate response. And instinctive behavior, it is looking like the memory of a particular species, and it is transmitted from one generation to the another generation through the heredity, otherwise through the inheritance. Here this is the real herring gull, where you can see a red spot on the beak, and we have prepared a model which is somewhat looking like the beak of the bird and with the red spot. We can extract the response by using this. If a particular model with the more red color, which called as a supernormal stimulus, we can also get more and more response from the birdlings. Here there is a graphical representation of the response of the birdlings. If the entire beak, if it is in red color, this much response. Here there is a red spot like the mother, this much response. And instead of red color, here we have a black spot, this much response. And there is no red spot or black any spot, and this much response. And here there is a gradual decrease of the response is observed. If you introduce a supernormal model, there is a more amount of response is seen. See here, if you introduce a herring gull, The graph is like this, going upwards. And instead of hearing gull, if you introduce a laughing gull model, then the graph comes down. And coming to the motivated behavior, where the scientists of J.B. Watson and group, they made many experiments on the mammals. Most of the experiments are based on the motive aspect of the instinctive behavior. Instinctive behavior is objective based or motive based, and there is a aim behind the each and every action, and there is a strong determination in order to reach a goal, and after reaching the goal we may get satisfaction, that is the satiety. This kind of response is known as the consummatory responsible. And there was a boy and used to was fond of bacon or salt biscuits, and whenever they are available he used to lap the salt upon the bacon and as well as the biscuits. Bacon is the fork which is mixed up with the salt, fork meat. At the age of 18 months, he used to show the salt jar, and whenever he gets the salt jar, he eats some salt, and later on he gives back the salt jar and he gets satiety or satisfaction. After some days, he was hospitalized and limited salt has been given or no salt, and after some days death occurred in the individual. And in order to know what happened actually, there was a autopsy. They collected the dead bodies samples, and that revealed that the diagnostics revealed that there was a cancer of adrenal gland in that boy, that is to the deficiency of hormones, adrenal hormones. And due to the salt deficiency of that boy, he has a desire to eat more and more amount of salt, and this desire is known as the motivation, that is the aim, the motivation. And eating of salt, that is a target or aim. Salt jar, visible salt jar, it is an excellent stimulus. And trials to reach aim, trials to get the salt, that is showing the salt jar, learning the word salt, and afterwards he gets satisfied and giving back the salt jar, that is a satisfaction. And there are hypothalamic mechanisms in the motivated behavior. Experiments on hypothalamus to identify excitatory and inhibitory mechanisms. Ventral middle part of hypothalamus acts like inhibitory center, and destruction of which leads to the consumption of more food, that was proven in the cat. And if the experiments done on the rats, destruction of ventral middle hypothalamus, that leads to the hypothalamic obesity due to the voracious feeding. And if you exaggerate the ventral middle portion of the hypothalamus with the electrical stimulus, if you apply the electrical stimulus, and thereby they do not eat food, because the ventral middle portion of the hypothalamus, it acts like the satiety center, satisfactory center, and lateral parts of hypothalamus, they act like the excitatory centers, and destruction of these excitatory centers leads to the no feeding, they do not eat any food. And if you stimulate the same part, that is the appetite, they feel very hungry. In some of the cases, there were lesions in the ventral middle portion of the hypothalamus of the rat. Otherwise, destruction of lateral parts of the hypothalamus that results in loss of appetite and thereby death of the individuals occur. It indicates satiety center inhibits the activity of the excitatory center. The desire expressed is the behavior due to the excitation of the hypothalamus, whereas the satiety is the activation of inhibitory center in all these animals. And there are certain regulating factors of these mutual reciprocal mechanisms. They are stimuli from the receptors, internal environment of the organism, information from the cerebral cortex, and as well as the thalamus. Thermoreceptors and osmoreceptors, chemoreceptors are present in the hypothalamus. Lateral parts of the hypothalamus have osmoreceptors that act like detectors. We can induce thirstiness in the organisms by providing high concentrated salt water to the cells that possess osmoreceptors. So, such kind of experiments were done by Anderson and McCon during the year 1955, and that were done on goats. The experiments were done on goats. What they did is they have given injection, they gave a small injection inserted into the hypothalamus of the goats. They inserted a small injection into the hypothalamus of the goats. The goats, after drinking enough amount of water, they injected the salt water into the hypothalamus 1 by 1000 ml. That is 1000 part in 1 ml. And goats tend to drink more water because of the high salt concentration in the blood. It is a normal thing. Whenever there is a high salt concentration in the blood, water from tissues enter into the blood and thereby we feel thirsty. It is a normal phenomena. Whereas here in the present experiment, salt water directly injected into the brain region, hypothalamic region, where actually the osmoreceptors are there. Thereby, the goat feels that there is an increased salt concentration in the entire blood of the body, and thereby, in order to neutralize the higher concentration of the salt, they drink more and more amount of water. How much it is? Goat takes 7 liters of more water, although it has taken enough water prior to the experiment. If you distract the lateral parts of the hypothalamus, they stop drinking water. They stop drinking water. So the experiments done on rats, whenever the saliva, if it is secreted into the mouth, they spit even saliva as it tastes bitter. And there were experiments done by Teitelbaum and Epstein. They have stated that the regulatory centers of food and water are arranged side by side in the brain. They act like the base for these complex mechanisms, and they are always together anatomically and functionally. That is the statement of Teitelbaum and the Epstein. And we will see the role of forebrain and limbic system in the motivated behavior. According to Grassman, anterior part of cerebral hemispheres, rhinencephalon or limbic system play an important role in motivated behavior. They are olfactory centers in primitive animals, but they organize and affect the activities of the hypothalamus in the higher animals. Lesions in limbic system and frontal lobes of cats and dogs bring significant change in feeding and courtship behavior. Lesions in amygdala of limbic system of cat leads to extreme sexual activity. They tend to mate with other animals and even with other non-living things. According to the Grassman, the neural pathways in between hypothalamus and limbic system may provide some basis for motivated behavior. In higher mammals, instinctive behavior may depend upon learning process. Apart from the process of evolution, right from rodents to primates, importance of reproductive hormone is decreased and there is a gradual increase to the importance of sensory stimuli, cortex and the learning. In higher primates and human beings, learning process dominates over the hormones. In rat, mating is depend upon hormones, whereas in monkeys, it is depend upon learning but not on the level of hormones. And finally, the cat exhibits domestic behavior upon the stimulation of the old cortex, whereas cruel behavior is shown upon the stimulation of neocortex. So these all are the characteristic features and the best examples of the experiments done in order to know the instinctive and as well as the motivated behaviors. Thank you one and all. For more videos, watch and subscribe my YouTube channel Swami Zoology. Thank you.